Welcome back, everyone, to our tour through the Oracle of the Hekatean Path. I'm with Ken again, and we are going to be starting with the first 6 cards of the deck today. So welcome back, darling.
Thank you. I'm excited for us to actually explore the deck in more detail.
It's because we've been talking about this for a long time, haven't we? But this is the first time that we will have gone through card by card, start to finish.
Yeah.
So, which seems weird.
It's going to be. Weird.
It's like we said on the last one. It's slightly weird for us because at the time of recording, we have still yet to receive our courtesy copies, which should be due over the next couple of weeks. But that's kind of part of the excitement, isn't it? So we are working with our test copies, which we're probably not going to show these on the screen much because the genuine published cards will be bigger, wider, and we've changed some of the numbers in the titles. But as we talk through the deck, we'll be putting the images of the cards up on screen for you to see. So, So, go for it. Start me off on card number 1. I'm interested with this because it was one of the earliest. It wasn't the first one we did, was it? But it was one of the earliest cards. But it just seems like such an apt way to begin the deck. So, tell us your thoughts behind it and what your concept was.
Yeah, so obviously there is this epithet of I can't even know helps if I can pronounce it, prosististos, which translates as like primordial or something that comes first. And when we looked at, when I come to sort of study Hecate and learn her origins, obviously her first recorded mentions are in Hesiod's Theogony, which kind of details her as this sort of sweeping goddess that's kind of got her fingers in all these pies. And as much as even today we sort of view her as a Greek goddess, actually, her actual origins are from elsewhere. It's understood that she has cult in different places. So there are certain people that think that she originates from what is now modern day Turkey. Then you've got Thrace, which is now modern day Bulgaria. There are there's even cause to say that maybe she came up through Africa and things like that. So but nobody can sort of put a pin in it exactly. And yet I wanted to illustrate in the deck how this mystery and enigma of her origins. And what I found myself gravitating towards was this image of the Burney relief that's also sometimes people refer to it as the Queen of Night relief. So
is this Sumerian? Is it
it's a Mesopotamian terracotta from the old Babylonian period, apparently. And it has been debated both as to the what the figure on it represents, but also whether it's actually even like there was a whole conjecture at one point whether it was even it was a forgery. It wasn't real. But what I liked about it is, if we put aside the people that want, whether it's Ishtar, Inanna, Lilitu, or Ereshkigal, I just saw the image of this winged, nude goddess-like figure with like bird's talons. It really spoke to something that's neither human nor like divine. It was something other. And it was that sort of, again, dealing with Hecate, it was that liminality that made me sort of think that it was a good illustration of this unknown quantity. And then we started to sort of develop the idea of what primordial means. And when we think about it in human terms, the primordial soup, the origins of life and all that. And so we kind of came up with this almost celestial environment, that this apparition of this goddess is emerging from this pool of creation, and then we utilize some of the stars in the celestial image that would be sort of highlighted aspects of her. And
well, it was interesting, wasn't it? Because when we did this card, I mean, once you described your concept, the actual imagery sort of chose itself, didn't it? And it's the background image is actually an image from the Hubble Space Telescope, which I previously used in the Quantum Tarot. But it's so apt for this because, I mean, the particular nebula is known as the Pillars of Creation, and it's basically a star factory, isn't it? So you can't get more primordial than that, you know.
No. And there's just something about the shapes of them as well. The nebulas, like cloud watching, you can interpret things in them, and the light in the goddess's navel in this one, I kind of saw that as the precursor to what is later known in the Chaldean oracles, this source of souls, this source of virtue, but also from this sort of reproductive, divine feminine aspect. But I kind of, like I say, I didn't want it to be too concrete. I wanted there to be that element of mystery and that unknown quantity, so that it gets you to ask the question, what are my origins? Where do I come from? To think back on what's led you to whatever the situation is that you're in at the moment, or especially if you're using the cards on a divinatory purposes, to think about the origins of things, to think about what's led you to this moment, and I think it's interesting that Hecate can exist both at the beginning and at the end and in the middle, all simultaneously, even though we have quite a linear concept of time. She kind of obviously she transcends all of that. And so there's this nature of perseverance through adversity and change, from the very start to our perceived ends. And I just thought that we nailed the sort of mystery of the origin story, if there is such a one, for Hecate, without being too literal or and I think people can now read into an image like this to contemplate Hecate's origins.
It was a revelation for me, I've got to be honest, because it never dawned on me that actually those origins are actually so far back that they're kind of lost in the mists, and that's what made her as a goddess so much more intriguing to me. The fact that we can't pinpoint, I mean, with so many of with all of the Greek deities that we kind of take for granted, we can kind of pin them down to a certain place in time, whereas it just never dawned on me that you couldn't do that with her. I was kind of waiting for the specific backstory, and it just wasn't there. It kind of goes so far back, and then you've got this barrier of fog, but then that kind of makes her more powerful and empowered to me, because you think, well, she's kind of beyond the sort of comprehension of ages, like you said.
And I think given the fact that when she appears and she starts to appear in the in recorded like history and things like that, but also her longevity and conflation with other deities, so that she becomes inextricably entwined with all these different cultures and all these different similar deities and stuff. So you look at things and you go, are we dealing with this goddess, or is it Hecate that's been renamed or misnamed? I mean, I look in museums and things like that, and I see images of Greco-Roman women holding torches, and sometimes it'll say it's Demeter, sometimes it'll say it's Persephone, sometimes it'll say it's Artemis, and you think, but maybe just a few of those times they may be mislabeled and it might actually have been Hecate. Well, it's hard to know for certain.
that's the other thing that fascinated me as this project progressed, is there are so many other deities included in this deck, which initially, when you outlined the concepts to me, I don't think I really got. But as we began to progress, and I realized that actually so many of these are potentially interchangeable, and also she kind of underpins a lot of them, you know. And as you say, were those statues who they say they were? Maybe not. Yeah. And that's the fun of it, and it's the fascination of it, you know. It's weird because I still don't have a clear face of her, even having illustrated 60 of these cards, because she has so many faces, more so than any of the sort of goddess narratives that I'd encountered before. So much as so many of my questions were answered when I was illustrating this deck, I was left with hundreds more, you know. But I'm not saying that in a bad sense, you know. And what a wonderful way to start the deck, you know. It's kind of got that quote in the beginning feel to it.
Yes, that's kind of what I was after.
Yeah.
How
about card number 2? Because this is kind of getting a bit more specific, isn't it? In that we're really into one of the aspects now.
So again, not an aspect necessarily that people, you know, especially if they're new to Hecate, they may not be necessarily familiar with this side of her. I mean, I know in modern day terms, a lot of people refer to her as like the Dark Mother, or the Dark Mother Goddess. And actually, if you go again, you looking into antiquity, you've got Proclus's hymn to Hecate and Janus, where she is named as many named mother of the gods.
So this is the aspect that we've covered here is Pamator, isn't it? So
yes, sorry.
How does that translate?
So Pamator, the mother of all, and I was kind of referring to this hymn where she's named as the many named mother of the gods whose children are fair. And it's, you know, even though we have the understanding that, especially from antiquity, that Hecate is a virgin maiden goddess, you know, the understanding of what virgin actually means in those contexts doesn't necessarily mean, you know, that she'd never had sex or she never had you know, children. But although there's no mythological sort of record really for that kind of stuff, what it means is that she didn't conform to, you know, the standard trope of getting married and being basically governed over by males. She, like Artemis, she kept her independence. And yet, obviously, when you're talking about divine beings, you kind of almost have to sideline our human understanding of what it means to, you know, for reproduction and origins and things like that. And I kind of got this sense in this mother of all sort of side of her, that also with her nurturer of youth aspect, which is Kurotrophos, which she shares with other goddesses as well, such as Aphrodite and Artemis. And it's this idea that she might not meet, you know, she might not physically, literally give birth to us, but there is this idea that on a cosmic scale, she, you know, she's nurturing us, she's guiding us, she protects us, she nourishes us, and even, you know, there are those times where she feels that she'll have to discipline us. These are all very motherly aspects, and so why not view her in that context? Why not view her as the mother? And I think that it's quite nice to have you know, that side of her, knowing full well that again, it's not all fluffy and airy fairy, because, you know, I don't know any mother that's all of that all of the time. You know, they have their off days, and they have the times where they get fed up of being asked all those questions and, you know, various things. And I don't think that Hecate is any different. And I just think that what I wanted in this card particularly was to sort of bridge that gap between the relatable mother energy, but also again still keeping it on this rather grand, almost cosmic scale. And I think by putting the image ahead of the earth, it kind of gives you that slight sort of celestial aspect.
Yes.
There's a Gaian energy to it, as well as, with the color palette especially. But there's just this simple, natural beauty of motherhood and nurturing, and it's, I mean, for a human, it's like an ingrained necessity. We crave it, we yearn for it, even years after we've grown up and flown the coop and things like that. And but at the same time, as much as this can be seen as a time of utilizing respite and nurturing ourselves, it's also, she's not there to coddle us. She'll kick you up the backside if you need it. And I think that's one of the sort of the twin-edged things with Hecate, is that she can do both. She can be really comforting and supportive, but also she can kick you into touch if you need it.
It reminds me, this was one of several cards that reminded me of parallels with the tarot. That so much of the archetypal imagery that we have in the tarot, actually we see prefigured within the sort of the pantheons of various different religions. And they're sort of archetypes that you see figured time and time again, but very powerfully in this card for me. The Empress in the tarot to me is a very raw figure. She is Mother Nature, but then she's Mother Nature in all her benign qualities, but also in all their hostile qualities as well. And I think that's something that came over to me when you were describing this card, in that, we're talking a nurturing mother, but then also a very powerful mother. And, those energies are quite raw and untamed on some levels,
Yeah.
So, but it's a really interesting image. I don't remember the ins and outs of us creating this one, but I remember we kind of had to juggle it around quite a bit before we got it right. But I think because of that kind of cosmic aspect of it, and
I think what was important was we had to get the right image of that would represent the goddess, and I think we just kind of stumbled on this statue of motherhood. With the suckling babe and the sort of the toddler sort of all sort of together in a very natural setting, and and then once we sort of put that again with the backdrop of the earth, but then we sort of had an element of the waters from the previous card. It was kind of like almost like a natural progression.
Wasn't it? Yeah,
things went on, but we were kind of almost drawing nearer as well to Earth, and therefore to the human condition, which I think Hecate is quite intrinsically part of. Which, as we will see with other cards, is she's always quite imminent. I mean, there are those occasions when she's not quite so imminent, but a lot of when she is, it's always very close to the sort of human toils and tribulations and things like that.
Yes. Talking of statues, let's move on to card number 3. This, probably of all the cards, is like the keystone to the deck for me, because this was, even though I knew so little about Hecate when we started, this was the image that I recognized.
Yes.
This is the Enodia card of the Crossroads, and it shows basically the sort of triumvirate figure of the goddess, isn't it?
Literally doing what most people are familiar with her doing.
Now, I was familiar with this purely from I'm a great lover of Robert Place's artwork and divination decks, and I've got the Lenormand deck that he did with Rachel Pollack, which is called the Burning Serpent Oracle. And of course, one of the additional cards of the Lenormand is the Crossroads. Yeah. But they very cleverly used the statue of Hecate at the 3-pronged crossroads. Which I thought,
I never thought about that one.
Yeah,
we kind of have touched on that a little bit with this, but this, like you say, this is probably one of those images that most people will be familiar with, and especially with with regards to Hecate, as a goddess of the Crossroads, as a triple goddess looking in all in all directions. And I think this was one of those cards that we kind of had to reinterpret once or twice before we nailed it, because I think we had to. I liked the sort of otherworldly quality of basically, being out in the remoteness of nature, walking a path and maybe necessarily not knowing where we're going, and then to come across this statue at the center of these crossroads with the two paths going off in unknown directions. I think we changed the statue once or twice.
We changed the statue because we'd worked with a couple of similar images of statues, hadn't we?
Yeah.
And then we opted for this one. And also we ended up kind of doing something quite intuitive, because I've kind of created the sort of effect, almost like an aurora borealis effect in the sky. Yeah. And we'd kind of tried different backgrounds, hadn't we? And it just hadn't sort of worked. And this was something really quite intuitive, but it just, I mean, one of the reasons I love this card is it's one that I would love to step into this world.
Yeah.
It's one of those that I really can treat like a window and think, I want to go there. But it just felt, there was something quite subjective about this. It had to be almost, for me, when we were creating this image, for it to work, it had to almost be like a secret place. Yeah. It was like finding the Crossroads, which was an incredibly well-kept secret. But then, you then have that, which of these three paths am I going to take? Am I going to go back the way I came? Or am I going to take one of these other two paths? And it's, we've kind of surrounded the statue and the paths by trees, haven't we? So you do feel, but then I realized afterwards that actually one of the reasons why that worked is because actually when you come to that crossroads, you were really standing at the foot of the goddess, and you're asking directions, and that's a very personal place.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that it only worked when we created that kind of secret liminal space, that's kind of twilight,
Yeah. And we kind of, we go through, we come to these crossroads continually in our lives, these moments of decision or even uncertainty. And I look at this one as well, and I think that it's quite apt that it's almost like the viewpoint, we're not quite there yet, we've not quite gone all the way up, we can still see a little bit of the path leading to the statue, but also this notion that you could necessarily be coming down one of the other paths and you will still see the same image,
the same aspect, don't you? Because of the way this, the sort of three-pronged statue and the three aspects, all at sort of equal triangular angles. Wherever you come from, you still meet her on the same terms, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's, in antiquity, the crossroads were often seen as remote and desolate places, not necessarily the places you wanted to hang around in. And I think that's where they sort of got this association with the other and the ethereal, people, both like normal things like criminals and, thieves and stuff would probably congregate around there. Yeah. And then the stories that would come back would, of people disappearing or being murdered and stuff would have more of a connotation with, oh, well, it must have been, some otherworldly thing, obviously, criminal justice and forensics and stuff, didn't exist in the same way that we know it now. So things, people got away with a lot more probably.
I suppose as well, there's also, the mystical side of it is kind of reinforced. A crossroads is liminal space, isn't it? There's dusk, it's the crossing of day into night, dawn, the crossing of night into day. But whenever you come to a crossroads, you are potentially crossing into another realm. You're leaving one realm behind, you're traveling in the direction of another. And it's kind of got, in its most basic sense, it's one of those, it's a meeting place, but it's also a liminal bridge, where whatever you do, you will be changing direction.
Yeah.
Very powerful archetypally when you think about it, isn't it?
Oh God, yeah. And I think that was one of the main sticking points is that it is even for people that are not familiar with Hecate in general, the archetype of the crossroads is intrinsic in most people's lives. You know, there isn't anybody that hasn't experienced those crossroad moments.
It transcends culture as well, doesn't it? You know, it's completely cross-cultural. So from that point of view, you know, you really are down into the levels of the collective unconscious by that stage.
Yes. Yeah.
But the actual statue itself, I mean, sort of tell me more about the statue itself. Would that have been, you know, a devotional statue at a crossroads? Would it have been in a temple? Would it have been?
Was probably, I mean, that one, I forget the name of it off the top of my head. That particular one would have been likely in a temple setting or a city setting. The ones at Crossroads would have probably been a lot more rudimentary or improvised. You know, there's this notion that potentially that they could have literally just been 3 masks on a post. You know, it was more to do with, I suppose, you know, as you got into the cities and the temples and the religion of the city states, things were a lot more sort of in keeping with, you know, the statues and things that we associate with antiquity. But there's a lot of practice and the household religion and the common folk that will have been lost because it wasn't either recorded in the same way, or it didn't have the you know, the big statues and the big you know, celebrations. And so I think, you know, there probably were occasions where there were more prominent statues at the Crossroads, but I think generally, you know, a lot of the especially remote ones would have probably just had sort of shrines and things that would have amassed. You know, but basically people that were passing through, leaving little offerings and hoping they can get away without incident, kind of thing.
It's just fascinating. So I mean, as this card really, it's an archetype of choices, isn't it? And it's, you know, if we're drawing it in a reading, it's kind of, it's highlighting the choices that we face, isn't it? And
and the good thing that I see with this as well is, like, you know, we're coming to that crossroads, so the goddess watches us approach, and whenever we make that decision, she also watches which direction we're going. She already knows what's at the other end, because eventually you will come to another crossroads and she will still be, and she'll be stood there as well. And so there's this interconnectivity of, you know, choices, of which she is at the crux of every single one. She knows, you know, she literally knows it before you do, but she, you know, she's definitely waiting for you to make that decision. She's not, you know, she's not a sign that's going to go, it's that way. You know, she literally just goes, yeah, I know which way you need to go, but you've got to figure that one out for yourself. And that's, I think that's part of the, almost like the divine comedy of working with her, really, is that it's this in joke that she knows full well. And she knows that you know, she knows that you know, but you're trying to convince yourself that you don't. And, you know, and you go through all these drawn out hardships of trying to, you know, stress over making the decision. And she just sits there almost laughing in a sort of, again, almost, if we look back at the Pamato card, you know, in this motherly kind of way, as if to say, you know, it doesn't have to be that complicated. It doesn't have to be that painful. Just get on with it.
You kind of reminded me of something that my friend Penny, a dear friend Penny, who I ran my first ever collaborative tarot workshop with back in 2015. And something that she taught me, and it's so obvious, but you don't always think about it. And she just said to me once, she said, look, the tarot will never tell you anything you don't already know deep down. And I'm kind of reminded of that, in that, you know, almost like you're being goaded by the goddess. It's like you can make the decision because you know right down there, you've just got to discover it for yourself. You know?
And that's it. When we come to these crossroads, we're aware of the choices, or we're aware of the potential outcomes. It's not as though it's necessarily sprung on us and we have absolutely no frame of reference. We know, like you say, deep down what to do, or what's the possible better course of action. But it is about being in your own sort of power and self-awareness to make the decision, rather than sort of constantly putting it off and stressing over the minute details.
Yeah. Let's move on to number 4. This one really intrigues me.
Yes, this one, the Melano card.
Dark Mind?
Yeah.
The card.
Now, this was interesting because this was a later addition to the whole concept of the deck. Yeah. I kind of inserted this one in when we were about halfway through the creative process of the deck in general. I forget which one I kind of pulled out. I know that I changed one card, and this
I can't remember now. I'd forgotten about it. Yeah, we dropped something to include this, didn't we?
Yeah, and again, this is one of those aspects of Hecate that's not necessarily fully recognizable or known.
This just intrigued me, and it still does. It was one of the most intriguing to do visually because, the source image that we started with is actually a ship's figurehead, isn't it?
Yeah, and again, it was one of those images when we seen it, we were like, "Oh, that's
it." Yeah, you'd said to me, "Split her down the middle. We need a dark side and a light side," which, to make it look convincing, was visually a challenge, and that was the fun of the card because there was a lot of detail cutting around, wasn't there? To make the shadows convincing, but also I ended up doing the same with the clouds. I mean, when I was putting the layers of the clouds in, some of them were in positive, some of them were in negative, and we've got light side, we've got dark side, we've got a dark torch, we've got a light torch, and there's so much juxtaposition and opposition. But just doing the card, the visuals of the card were just making me intrigued about what this was saying about the goddess,
Yeah.
But then I kind of understand it better now because, she's darks and lights in extremes, isn't she?
Exactly. Yeah, and I think Melano is sometimes seen as an aspect of Hecate, and sometimes she's seen as an individual sort of chthonic nymph, specifically from the sort of Orphic traditions and such. Yeah. But the idea of this being that's born both of heaven and the underworld, that she's both this dark and light in one sort of being, and it's that for me it kind of reflects that juxtaposition we have inside ourselves with this warring between right and wrong and good and bad and dark and light and all that, and it can really pull us apart on a quite literal sense of our self-worth and our self-expression and things. And I think when we found this image of obviously the ship's prow, because obviously it's the way that they would be positioned on a ship, it looks almost like it's being stretched and pulled back.
Yeah.
And I thought once we put the torches in those hands, it's almost like this never-ending struggle between trying to integrate both sides. And do we let it pull us to the extreme where it rips us apart, or do we find that liminality of the goddess and bring everything right down the middle and find a way for them to coexist? And it's quite an interesting. I find it quite interesting that I decided to add it, because I kind of knew, I kind of knew that it would necessarily be one that a few people might raise an eyebrow to, especially with the sort of the translation of what Melano may stand for, because there's been lots of debate and conjecture over that.
Yeah,
and because majority of it is generally to do with things that potentially relate to like the pallid color of corpses and quinces, and there's lots of other things like that. But I did find this one reference that just referred to her as dark-minded, and I thought that sort of spoke especially well to the psychology of this dichotomy of opposites. And I just thought that, again, this is another aspect of the goddess that's inherently human,
very much.
And I just really wanted to include that there, because we are constantly at odds with ourselves, and it's trying to keep things in good order sometimes is so exhausting and so difficult. But by the same time, by trying to keep everything together, we eventually reach a burnout and end up catapulted into one of the extremes. And so this is this whole conflicting polarity that, embodied in this goddess, but also so inherently reflected in everybody's day-to-day lives.
It took me back to the tarot again, but actually 2 cards. Because as we were creating this, I was very much reminded of the World card, with the World Dancer with the 2 wands. And it kind of helped me to understand the duality going on there. The fact that, a lot of tarot decks actually, will portray the World Dancer as a hermaphrodite, and the duality again is, but then also a card like the 2 of Swords, where, in the Waite Smith, you have, the woman sort of blindfolded, uneasily trying to hold these 2 giant swords in balance. And it was all of those things. Again, it made me realize that we're dealing with, archetypes that are really deeply rooted, and that, in this particular goddess mythology, there is so much that we have to learn about ourselves, and how much, human nature is reflected back to us in all of this mythology, and that really came home to me when we were doing this. I'm so glad you did choose to include this card, because visually it was, it's a fairly simple composition, but it was visually intriguing, and it really made me want to ask more questions, and it made me think about, because we have got a card further on where, she's all blazing light, haven't we? Other cards, like I mentioned in the last video, one card particularly where you really see the grotesquerie, of her dark aspect, whereas it's all here, in the most enigmatic way. I love it. That was kind of one of my light bulb moments, I think, when we were doing this. And I can't remember what you chucked out. I was quite regretful you were chucking something out, but thankfully now that does seem to have taken its place very effectively.
Yeah, so, definitely.
How about number 5? Because this is a figure that most people will recognize, isn't it?
Yes.
5 showing Gorgo the Grim.
Yeah, now this is quite an interesting thing, because obviously everybody knows Medusa, everybody knows the Gorgon, but not necessarily the relation to Hecate.
I certainly didn't.
Now, it's, it comes through this notion that the descriptive terms used in some of the ancient hymns and stuff of Hecate being serpent haired and coiled with serpents, and there's a lot of serpentine imagery to it, and this notion of Gorgo, of the Medusa, it's this, they were seen as quite protective emblems. The Gorgonid faces were often emblazoned on shields. You've got Athena's aegis, or was Medusa's head, and it's this notion that it's Medusa specifically, she turns people to stone. There's this almost scary nature to it, where if you look at the variations of the myth that led Medusa to become the Gorgon, this notion that she was punished by Athena because she was either she was raped or she had a dalliance with, depending on the version of the story that you read, with Poseidon, and because it was done in the temple of Athena, she basically is punished for it. And yet there's been a few more modern, sort of almost like feminist reinterpretations of it, which I've actually found quite interesting, which is maybe it's not a punishment for her. Maybe Athena gave her the tools that she never would need, so that she would never be taken advantage of again. And so it's this idea that the stony stare, the snakes, and everything else. It's not necessarily that Medusa's grotesque. It's that she now has the capability of it, making sure that she's never taken advantage of again.
Yeah.
And I think when we look at this, even though this card symbolizes fear, I think that's that again, we're going to basic instincts.
Yeah.
There's so many people have this innate fear of snakes. And even just the notion of being turned to stone, it's not a pleasant thought, really.
No. It's a very primal fear, isn't it? I mean, the fear of snakes, it's as primal as a fear of spiders.
Yes.
And, not without reason, in a lot of cases. But again, the sort of the whole myth of being turned to stone, it's interesting that's a mythological symbol that you see repeating across so many different cultures and narratives. It's very deeply rooted. And I suppose it's a fear of I don't know, it's a fear of disempowerment, isn't it? And it's very much, it's very basic level.
Yeah. And if you, maybe it's just my brain, but when I think about being turned, if you were turned to stone, is it are you still aware? Are you observing? Are you, is it a prison? And the one thing that I see in this card, with it be of Hecate Gorgo, I use this term of the grim-faced mirror, and it's not so much that we're scared of her; we're scared of what we see of ourselves reflected in her, because she knows all of the dark secrets, all of the things we're trying to keep hidden, and it's the fear of facing up to that reflection. That's what can immobilize us. That's what can petrify us. And but again, if we can get past that, the healing and the progress that can be made is really powerful. But we're dealing with really base primal instincts.
And you're into the similar realms of the tarot devil, aren't you? Which is representing the dark side that we fear to face. Everything primal that we are, where very often, I mean, the devil can also represent the fear of our own primal instincts and potential, the rawness of it all. And I think that's what struck me when we were doing this card. You're in similar territory, albeit with different symbolism, but it's pointing in the same direction. And it's all what's contained within. Just giving face to the things buried within the psyche that we dread to see the most. It's powerful, really powerful.
Yeah, and I think with the images that you selected, these very classical, Renaissance style images of both the Gorgon, but also these notions of fear and stony statues and things. It really,
it's a combination.
Calculates it.
This was a challenge to do because, I mean, I was looking to combine the image of the Gorgon is actually a Renaissance painting. The screaming faces, I think were Leonardo sketches or something along those lines. And then, of course, the central figure was actually a statue. So it was, how do I electronically combine all of these things and make them look convincing? But then, actually, when you started talking colours, I thought, this is the way we do it, because by the time you're putting artificial color casts on everything, you're creating something very surreal. And it was one of the things that kind of creeped me out with this card was when you said, I want really sickly greens and purples. It's like, but it works. It's a sort of color combination that you kind of almost don't want to see in this instance. And I'm kind of, it's a profoundly uncomfortable card, but it's one, again, that I'm kind of happy with what you managed to channel and how I managed to translate it. I'm going to go on to the next one, because this was only the second card that we created, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Now, this is this was kind of when the first card we created was the Strophilus wheel, which is, which I've come to realize is very much a central part of Hekatean imagery. Whereas then when you kind of gave me the brief for this one, and it was just not what I expected, but this is Breo, the angry one, and it's basically the metaphor for fury, isn't it? And I mean, this was fabulous.
I see this as kind of like almost again, harkening back to the tarot, but this is a tower card for me.
Yes.
I refer to Bremo as the Shatterer of Worlds.
Yeah, and which is what you said to me right at the beginning, because I remember you saying to me, "Look, I want screaming face, and she is shattering glass and shattering just about everything else." And I'm kind of thinking, okay. So, right, I'm expected to work miracles here, but let's give it a go. And we kind of got there eventually, didn't we? But it is that, I think what you kind of really instilled in me is that scream of anger that is so grotesque, so furious, and so powerful that it will literally shatter worlds. And it's quite a frightening archetype to work with, isn't it?
It is, but at the same time, I didn't want it to just be about this notion of fury and this idea that we are doing something wrong by the goddess. It's not necessarily, it's
not wrong.
No, yeah, it's not. Yeah. It's not one of these blame cards or anything. But basically, it's that this. When it came to deciding how to execute the imagery for this, I could have gone quite literal. I could have had. Hecate with her whips and chains and daggers and slavering the dogs and all a lot of imagery. But then I thought, no,
that kind of wouldn't have worked in the same way.
No, there is something very pure about this.
Yeah,
because it is another very base sort of instinct. Yeah. And what I kind of when I see this shattering and this. It's the storms of change. These are necessary things, and there are times. I mean, and I'm guilty of this, and I'll hold my hands up to it, where we're not listening to the guidance or the signs, or we're trying to walk around with our fingers in our ears. There is no escaping the message of Bremo. You can't put your fingers in your ears when she's trying to get your attention. And it's just the fact that you need to act on a very sudden, very immediate change of direction, change of action, because in a way it's almost, this is the warning. This is like the last chance to avoid the iceberg, or, whatever metaphor you want to put into. And I think, again, it's easy to look at these things at face value and go, oh my God, that's really terrifying. But actually to apply them again into the basis of the human condition and the goddess being there as a guide, she's like, yeah, alarm bells are ringing. If you do this, she's going to not be happy with you because you're not listening, And
there was also something really quite reassuring about this card to me in the end, because, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is kind of something I got from it as a novice coming to the goddess, that actually there's a concept within Christian tradition of righteous anger. And I realized, for me, that's what I saw here. There's times when it's perfectly legitimate to be downright furious. And what matters is not the anger, it's how it's channeled. And it can be channeled as a force for good. And I think one of the things I learned from this has actually kind of been one of the cards that's really taught me through this deck, because it's made me realize that there's times when I have a right to be angry, but there's also times when I have a right to channel it to set boundaries.
Yeah.
And it gives me hope that actually I'm not disempowered. And that might sound strange, but is that kind of part of the sort of...
There is definitely a catharsis to this, like you say, channeling that righteous anger. And I think, again, this harkens back to some of the more unsettling aspects of the goddess. But that when you look at figures in antiquity like, Medea, she uses these unsettling aspects to great effect. She gets power, she can affect change, and it's and she's using these things that most people would run for the hills from, and and if we take a leaf out of that book, we can do the same. We can empower ourselves, and we can learn different things about ourselves through the goddess's aspects. And it's not that she, we have to look at these things without being too literal from a human point of view. When we think about the goddess, the goddess's fury and this aspect of Bremo, we're not meaning that she's acting from places of jealousy and petulance and anger in literal terms, but that it's basically that we are doing something that to her is not in our best interests necessarily. And words have power, and if you're not going to listen to a conversation or a whisper or a subtle hint, Hecate is one of those goddesses that there's only so many subtle hints that she will give before she starts knocking on the doors and screaming and saying, "Will you listen to me?"
It's also basic parenting.
Yes. Yeah. And but the good thing about it is, again, it's it's another tough lesson to learn, but we have don't resist it, because the more we resist it, the more we shore ourselves up and go, no, I'm not budging, I'm not budging, I'm not budging. That's when the cracks start to show, and that's when it starts to hurt. That's where the pain comes from, the resistance to change. And it's this I don't know, this wave of almost fury that can come out can be so cleansing. Who doesn't feel better after having a massive scream when everything's pent up for so long? Just get it. It's a release. It's getting it out, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. There's a lot of shame attached to these type of emotions, but if
I think we're taught to fear anger, and we're taught to be ashamed of it, and yet it's as valid an emotion as any other part of us. It's a natural part of who we are, and actually it has its place, it has its uses, and I think that's what this card and this aspect of it taught me. So why don't we stop there, and then we will save cards 7 to 12 for the next part, because I'm just kind of looking through, and I'm kind of really excited about some of the aspects that we're going to be doing in part 2. Are actually, not part 2. It'll be the third video, won't it? But it's just getting more interesting as we go. So, for anyone who's been watching, I kind of hope you've enjoyed this. We really have. I mean, don't get us started. You might have noticed we just keep on going. But if you've enjoyed it, do join us next time as we continue this journey through the Oracle of the Hekatean Path. And just to remind you that it will be available. It's being published by Lo Scarabeo. It's due out on the 25th of February, 2024 in Europe. And I think is it a month later?
No, I think it's just the 8th of March.
8th of March, so it's not far behind. So, So we will, as I say, thank you for watching thus far, and hopefully join us again next time. Take care.